Today we're going to be doing the apple browning project. With each piece of fruit, it contains an enzyme or a substance produced by all living things that speed up a process, and this enzyme reacts with oxygen or O2 or the air to produce melanin. Melanin is what browns the fruit. So by knowing naturally that oxygen causes a fruit to brown, I proposed that maybe by changing the environment that the the apple is placed in, that the browning process would be slowed down as opposed to just letting it sit in the air. So with that, I formed the hypothesis. If I change the experiment of the apple, then the length of the time for the apple to brown will be affected. For this project, you need 4 or more different types of solutions. With this one, I have air, which is going to be placed right here, 1 cup of plain water, 1 cup of white vinegar, 1 cup of milk, and 1 cup of pure lemon juice. And so I'm going to take my sliced apple and place into each one of these for 30 seconds before moving them, and then we're going to let them sit for 10 minutes, and we're going to see and check every 10 minutes for 30 minutes to see how the browning process has been affected. Right now, the apples have minimal brown. There is a little bit right here, but they're somewhat moist because of them just being freshly sliced. They're very smooth on the apple part and the skin of the apple. And as you can see, they're yellowish, whitish, and they're red apples. So with that, I'm going to place in each solution for 30 seconds. And then I will move them around or flip them to make sure that they evenly get distributed, or the solution is evenly distributed. Okay, it's been 30 seconds, so I'm going to flip each apple to make sure that the solution is evenly distributed. But after each one, I'm going to rinse the tongues to make sure that there is no cross-contamination between each of the apples and the solutions. In 30 seconds, we will bring these out and we will let them sit for about 30 minutes and check in with every 10 minutes to observe how they are doing. It has now been 30 seconds, so I'm about to pull them out of each solution. And once again, I'm going to rinse in between each one to keep from cross-contaminating. This one did not have anything. We're pulling the one out of plain water now.
What was that one?
That was the one with vinegar. I'm pulling the one out of the milk. And I'm finally pulling the one out of the pure lemon juice. So now I'm going to start a timer for 10 minutes, and in about 10 minutes we will see how the browning process has been affected. Okay, so it has been 10 minutes since we last soaked the apple slices. And so far, there's a little bit of brown on this apple slice. There's some brown right there. It's a little rough on the apple slice, not as smooth as the rest of them were, or as it was before we dipped it. It's a little, I don't know if you can see that right there. You may not be able to see it on camera, but there's some dents almost, and there's a little bit of brown. There's some browning on the top. So for the one with plain water, there's a little bit of brown right here, and there's a little bit of brown right there. It's not as rough as the air one was, and there's just a little bit of brown on this side. Definitely not as rough or as brown as the air. So let's move on to the vinegar. There's a little brown right here. There's a little brown right there. There's a little brown around here, but it's fairly smooth. There's only a little brown at the very top, but there was a little brown before we started dipping them on each of the apple slices. There's some brown right here. This is the one with the milk. There's some brown right there, some brown right there, some brown right here, and then the one with the pure lemon juice. There's some right here. Not really a whole lot right there. It's really smooth. Just a reminder, whenever you're picking up things like this, especially when you have acidic things such as the lemon juice, to always wash your hands after handling them. Make sure you don't ever get it in your eyes. You don't want it to be affecting them, and you don't want to burn yourself or burn your eyes. If these were regular chemicals, if these were chemicals in a lab, I would not be handling them with my hands. I would be handling them with the proper materials, with gloves on, of course. So I'm going to start the timer for another 10 minutes, and we're going to come back and we're going to continue to observe these apple slices. Okay, so it has now been another 10 minutes since we last observed the apple slices, and it has been 20 minutes since we soaked the apple slices in each of their different solutions. So we're going to take the air apple slice, and it's drying out. There is a lot of brown right here, right through there. It might look a little bit lighter on camera than it does in person, but it's very, very rough. I don't know if you can tell that right here, but it's very rough. So let's look at the one with the plain water. So you have the brown right here. There's a little bit of roughness right there. There's a little bit of brown right here, and then a little bit of brown. Not a huge difference from what it looked like about 10 minutes ago and from the very beginning, because there was a little bit of brown on each of the apples before we placed them and soaked them, but there is a little bit more brown now. So there's a little brown right here, there's a little bit of brown right here, there's some brown right here, right here. It's still fairly moist, definitely a lot different in texture and wetness, in addition, like in contrast to the air apple slice. There's a lot less browning in the vinegar apple slice as opposed to the plain water or even the air. We're gonna look at the milk apple slice now. Like the vinegar, it's fairly moist. There's not a whole lot of roughness going on. There's a little bit, there's not a whole lot of brown. There's a brown right here. Still fairly smooth, fairly wet. And then with the pure lemon juice, there is very little brown that did not have brown already. So there's some brown right here, some brown right there, but it's still very wet and very smooth. And we will check back in another 10 minutes for the final look at the browning process for these apples and contrasting. Okay, so it has now been 10 minutes since the last observation, meaning that it has been 30 minutes since we soaked the apple slices, and let's see what we have. So here we have a lot of more brown right through here. It's still drying out. It's not as wet, not as moist as it was in the very beginning. There's a big difference in texture right here. There's very, very rough. So let's look at the one with the plain water. There's still brown, still brown, but it is very minimal as to what has changed since the last time that we looked, and even since the beginning of the project. The texture of the apple slice is still rather smooth. There may be a few bumps here and there. It's still rather moist, and there hasn't been that large of a change. So let's look at the one with the vinegar. This one has almost no texture change whatsoever. It's very, very, very smooth. Although there is minimal browning, some of that browning is due to what it will look like before the project occurred. So let's look at the milk. The milk, just like the vinegar, has very minimal browning. There is a little bit of a texture change right towards the bottom, right there, and then right there. I don't know if you can see that, but it is a little bumpy. But overall, it didn't really brown as much either. And then now let's look at the pure lemon juice. This one has probably the least amount of browning. Yes, there are some spots here and there, but it doesn't have a lot of browning. There's a little bit of a texture change right here. Overall, it's still rather moist. If you take the apple that was just left out, that was not soaked in anything, and compare it to each of the slices, you can tell that there is a very, very big difference in the color. The apple slice that was left out has a lot more browning and is a lot drier than the rest of them, especially this pure lemon juice. The reasoning for this is because this lemon juice right here is a lot more acidic, and so the acid in the juice keeps the enzyme, which was the substance that we talked about earlier, where the substance that keeps or causes a reaction to occur faster. It keeps this enzyme from producing as fast and therefore reacting with oxygen, which is the air, as fast to produce the browning. Now, when you do experiments like this, it's important to always follow the scientific method, which means you are proposing a question, forming a hypothesis, usually with the if-then statement, then experimenting, collecting data, and concluding. And in conclusion to this, my hypothesis was correct. To remind you, my hypothesis was if I changed the environment of the apple, then the length of the time for the apple to brown will be affected. And you can see this with these, because these apples are definitely, this apple is definitely a lot darker than these. The changing of the environment caused the apple to brown slower. So, yeah, there you go.